Midwest, February 14th, 2024. A woman is driving toward her own erasure. The windshield wipers slap a hypnotic rhythm against the gray slush, but they can't scrub away the dread tightening in my chest. My name is Susan Cole, and I've spent my entire life trying to buy the love of people who were quietly planning to bankrupt me. Inside that peeling white colonial, a single envelope waits on the desk, a piece of paper that will prove my parents didn't just overlook me. They deleted me. I thought I was going home to help. I didn't know I was driving straight into an ambush that would force me to choose lose my family or lose myself. If you enjoy stories about standing up for yourself, please stick around. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The windshield wipers slapped a rhythmic, hypnotic beat against the glass, scrubbing away the gray slush of a Midwestern February. But they couldn't scrub away the knot tightening in my stomach. I was 32 years old, a senior accountant with a pristine credit score, and my own condo in the city. Yet the moment my tires crunched onto the gravel of my childhood driveway, I wasn't Susan Cole, the independent professional. I was just Susie, the backup plan. In America, we're sold this glossy Hallmark movie idea that family is a sanctuary, a place where you are loved simply because you exist. But as I killed the engine and stared up at the peeling white paint of my parents' two-story colonial, I knew the truth. For me, family had never been a sanctuary. It was a scorecard. And no matter how hard I played, no matter how many points I racked up, the game was rigged, so I could never win. My parents had spent years praising my brother like he hung the moon and treating me like a smudge on the window they wished they could erase. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, letting the old ghosts wash over me. I could still smell the cheap metallic scent of the gymnasium on my high school graduation day. I remembered walking up to my father Mark, clutching my diploma, and the letter confirming my partial academic scholarship. I was beaming, desperate for him to look at me the way he looked at Ryan. Dad had clapped once, his eyes already scanning the crowd for his friends. "Good for you, Susie," he had said, his voice flat. "Just remember, grades aren't everything. Your brother, now he's got natural leadership. You're just responsible." It wasn't a compliment. In the Cole household, responsible was code for serviceable. It meant I was the utility player, the one who did the work so the star could shine. The memories shifted to a dusty little league diamond. My brother Ryan, the golden boy, standing at the plate. He struck out, swinging, throwing his bat in a tantrum. But Dad didn't scold him. He cheered. "That's the fire, Rye. You've got the passion, you're going to take care of this family one day." Minutes later, when I asked if I could join a summer reading program, Dad didn't even look down. "Go help your mother in the kitchen, Susan. She's overwhelmed." And Mom Linda Cole was always there in the background, a silent accomplice, wiping her hands on a dish towel, offering guilty, half-hearted smiles, but never once stepping in to correct the balance. She chose the path of least resistance, and that path ran right over me. I shook the memories off and stepped out into the cold. I had spent my entire adult life trying to prove them wrong, or perhaps trying to buy the affection they gave Ryan for free. I moved out at 18, put myself through college without asking them for a dime, and built a stable career. But I never cut the cord. Instead, I became their financial safety net. When Dad's hardware store had a bad year, I covered 3 months of their mortgage. When the transmission blew on their SUV, I paid the mechanic. I paid for their utility bills, their medications, their comfort. My internal monologue had been a broken record for a decade. If I just sacrifice a little more, if I write one more check, they'll finally see me. They'll realize I'm not just their daughter, but a person worthy of respect. I didn't realize then that I was investing in a bankrupt account. Inside, the house smelled of stale coffee and lemon polish. "Susan, that you?" Dad's voice barked from the study, devoid of any warmth. "You're late." "Traffic was bad, Dad," I said, hanging my coat. Mom was in the kitchen, aggressively scrubbing a pot to avoid eye contact. "Don't just stand there," Dad called out. "I need you to sort this mess. My accountant is breathing down my neck. I walked into the study. He handed me a chaotic stack of manila folders and envelopes. Organize and scan these. I can't find anything. I sat at the heavy oak desk, the one I was never allowed to touch as a kid, and started sorting. Insurance policies, tax returns from 2018, medical bills. And then near the bottom of the stack, a thick cream-colored envelope caught my eye. The label was handwritten in Dad's block letters, estate plan and last will and testament. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hesitated. It felt invasive to look taboo. But then I thought about the mortgage payments. I thought about the $5,000 I had transferred to them just last month for house repairs. I convinced myself it was normal to peek. I was the responsible one after all. I opened the flap and pulled out the document. I scanned the pages looking for my name. I found it in the opening preamble. We love both our children, Ryan and Susan. I kept reading, waiting for the distribution of assets. Article 3, the real property. The house, the land, the rental unit downtown. To my son, Ryan Cole. Article 4, financial assets. The savings accounts, the retirement fund, the stocks. To my son, Ryan Cole. Article 5, personal property. The cars, the jewelry, the heirlooms. To my son, Ryan Cole. I flipped the page back and forth, certain I had missed a paragraph. Maybe a codicil. Maybe a typo. But there was nothing else. My name appeared once in a generic declaration of love, and then vanished. I wasn't just receiving a smaller share. I was receiving nothing. The house I helped pay for, the savings I helped protect. It was all going to the golden boy who couldn't hold down a job for 6 months. I felt like I had been punched in the throat. It wasn't just about the money. It was the message. The years of sacrifice, the checks, the late-night crises I solved, it meant absolutely nothing to them. I heard Dad's heavy footsteps on the hardwood. He walked in holding a fresh mug of coffee. "What's taking so long, Susan?" he grumbled. I didn't hide the will. I held it up my hand, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it burned. "So," I said, my voice tight and quiet, "you're really going to erase me from this family." Dad didn't flinch. He didn't look guilty. His face hardened into a mask of annoyance, as if I were a child complaining about a bedtime snack. "You're overreacting," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Ryan is the one who needs it. You have a career, you have your own life. You're fine on your own." The air left the room. That was the moment, I told myself, the paper crinkling under my grip. That was the moment I realized my dad didn't just overlook me. He had already erased me in his mind long before he wrote it down on paper. I didn't just let him walk away with that dismissal. I followed him into the kitchen, the will still clutched in my hand like a weapon I didn't know how to use yet. Mom was staring into her coffee mug, as if the ceramic held the secrets to invisibility, but I wasn't going to let her hide. I slammed the paperwork onto the table, the sound echoing off the cheap linoleum I had paid to replace 3 years ago. "Let's get this straight," I said, my voice trembling, not with tears but with adrenaline. "I paid 3 months of your mortgage last winter when the store was failing. I paid for the new water heater. I send you $500 a month for groceries that I know go straight into Ryan's gas tank. And in return, I get—" what? A generic sentence and a pat on the head. Dad turned slowly, leaning back against the counter with a look of supreme boredom. He shrugged, a casual gesture that made my blood boil. "That's what kids are supposed to do, Susan. You help the family. It's not a transaction." He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling. "Ryan is the future of this family. He's the one who will carry the name forward. He needs the assets to build a legacy. You're good with numbers, Susan, not leadership. This house belongs with someone who can protect it, not someone who's going to get married and change her name anyway." I looked at Mom, begging her to say something to acknowledge the insanity of what he was saying. "Mom," I asked. She finally looked up, her eyes wet but her jaw set in that familiar conflict-avoidant line. "You're independent, Susie," she whispered. You don't need the help, Ryan. He needs a foundation. Their words felt like a physical blow, a threat to my very identity. They weren't just rejecting me financially, they were declaring that I didn't fundamentally belong. I was a resource to be harvested, not a daughter to be cherished. Dad took a step closer, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. And don't think about causing a scene, Susan. You wouldn't want to threaten your own parents' security over a piece of paper, would you? Be careful. If you stir up drama, you'll just prove exactly why we couldn't trust you with anything. People talk. You don't want them thinking you're unstable or ungrateful. It was blackmail, pure and simple. He was willing to paint me as the villain, the crazy daughter, if I dared to question his judgment. I looked at the two of them, the people I had spent my life trying to please, and something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was a quiet, clean severance. I realized I had a choice. I could continue being the good daughter who sacrificed herself on the altar of their approval, or I could choose to survive. I picked up my purse. I didn't look back at the will on the table. If I don't count as your family on paper, I said, my voice dead calm, then I won't act like your bank account in real life. Dad laughed, a harsh bark. Don't be dramatic. You'll come back. You always do. I walked out of the house in a daze, driving the 3 hours back to the city in silence, feeling like I had just walked out of my own erasure. I thought the hardest part was over. I thought I had made my point. But I underestimated their audacity. The first test came only 4 days later. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Property taxes are due next week. Dad's stressed. Can you send the usual amount? I stared at the screen, blinking. They had just told me I was worth nothing to them, yet they still expected the deposit. A few hours later, a text from Dad, far more direct. We need you to transfer $1 and $200 by Friday. Don't make us regret trusting you. I read the messages as what they were, threats disguised as requests. If I didn't pay, they would label me selfish. I typed out a reply, my fingers shaking. You left me out of the will. Ryan can handle it. That's when the escalation truly began. Mom switched tactics, sending long, guilt-woven paragraphs about how parents sacrifice everything for their kids and how I was abandoning them in their old age. Then Ryan chimed in. His text popped up, casual and mocking. It's just money, Suz. Stop being so dramatic and help them like you always do. You know they need it. I remembered every time I was told to be the bigger person, while Ryan coasted through life on a cushion of excuses. I looked at my empty apartment, the silence heavy but mine. I resolved then and there, no more sacrifices for people who would happily erase me. I stopped sending the money. I ignored the bank transfer requests. I let the calls stack up, 5, 10, 20 missed calls. I cooked a modest dinner alone that night, stirring pasta in a quiet kitchen. I felt small, but for the first time I felt free. I worried about being a bad daughter, that deep-seated American guilt about family obligation warring with the necessity of self-reliance, but I held firm. Finally, after a particularly manipulative text from Dad calling me selfish and ungrateful for letting them struggle, I did the unthinkable. I went to my contacts and hit block. Silence fell over my phone. I exhaled, thinking I finally had peace. But I was wrong. What I didn't know was that blocking their calls wouldn't stop them. It would only push them to ambush me in a way I never saw coming. The silence I had curated lasted exactly 3 days before the world broke it for me. I was sitting at my desk at work, staring at a spreadsheet, when my phone buzzed. It was Maya, a friend from high school who still lived in my hometown. The message was short, don't look at Facebook. But also, you need to look at Facebook. My stomach dropped. I knew with the instinct of a hunted animal that the ambush had moved from my phone to the public square. I opened the app, and there it was, staring back at me like a car crash I couldn't look away from. Mom had posted first. It was a picture of an old withered tree with a vague, weeping caption. It breaks a mother's heart when children forget their parents after everything we sacrificed. Pray for our family during this difficult time of abandonment. It was passive-aggressive perfection designed to garner sympathy without technically naming names. But Dad didn't have Mom's subtlety. His post was a direct strike. Some kids would rather erase their own family than help in tough times, he wrote. Sad to see a daughter turn her back on the people who raised her just to save a few bucks. And then the kicker, he had tagged me. I scrolled down, my hands trembling. The comments section was a firing squad. Church friends, neighbors, distant cousins, people who had known me since I was in diapers were piling on. How could a daughter do that, wrote Mrs. Higgins from down the street. So selfish, added my aunt. This generation has no respect. And then I saw Ryan's comment pinned to the top. Don't worry, Dad. I'd do anything for this family. Some people are just too wrapped up in themselves to care about anyone else. I felt like I had been stripped naked in the middle of the town square. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. It was a social ambush. My parents knew exactly what they were doing. In our town, family is a religion. Respect your elders is the first commandment. By painting me as the prodigal daughter who abandoned them in their time of need, they were weaponizing our community's values against me. They were betting that the shame of public opinion would force me back into line, back into my role as the silent paying bank account. I went to the gym that evening, and I could feel the eyes on me. A woman I recognized from high school whispered to her friend as I walked by. I felt exiled, cast out from the tribe. My first impulse was to delete my account, to hide, to let the storm blow over. I had spent my entire life swallowing insults to keep the peace. Silence was my default setting. I told myself that engaging would only make it worse, that airing dirty laundry was trashy, that I should be the bigger person. But then I looked at Dad's post again. Erase their own family. The irony tasted like ash in my mouth. They had erased me from the will. They had erased my contributions. They had erased my future. And now they were rewriting my past. If I stayed silent, their version of the story would become the truth. I would be the villain forever. I realized then that keeping the peace was just a nice way of saying accepting the abuse. I closed my eyes and took a breath that rattled in my chest. If they wanted a public story, I would give them the real one. I didn't write a rant. I didn't call them names. I opened my banking app. I opened my email archives. I went into the digital trenches of the last 10 years and started taking screenshots. I found the bank transfer from 2 years ago, $3,400, mortgage assistance. I found the email from Dad, Susie, we're short on the property tax again. Just one more time, please. I found the text thread where Ryan mocked my job but asked for gas money in the same breath. I gathered it all, the receipts of my love, the proof of my exploitation. I wasn't going to destroy them with lies. I was going to defend myself with the cold, hard truth. I opened a new post on my page and I shared it to the local community group where Dad had posted his attack. I uploaded the photos. Then I began to type. I normally keep my private life private, I wrote. But since my parents have decided to discuss my character publicly, I feel the need to clarify a few things. I haven't abandoned anyone. For the last decade, I have paid mortgages, medical bills, and debts for a family that claims I am selfish. Last week, I learned that I have been completely written out of my parents' will in favor of my brother Ryan. That is their right. But it is also my right to refuse to fund a household that I have been erased from. I will not be your walking wallet or your invisible daughter anymore. Love is not a transaction, but neither is abuse. I stared at the screen. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was the nuclear option. There was no going back from this. I hovered over the post button. I was terrified, but for the first time in my life I wasn't ashamed. I clicked. The post went live. I set the phone down on the table and watched the screen light up. 1 notification, then 3, then 10. Within minutes, the phone was buzzing, continuously vibrating across the wood like a living thing. The town was picking a side. I just didn't know which side that would be. The aftermath of my post was immediate and chaotic, a digital shockwave that fractured my carefully compartmentalized life. I sat on my couch watching the notifications roll in like a tide I couldn't stop. The reaction was a confusing mix of vindication and condemnation. My inbox filled with private messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, cousins apologizing, telling me they had no idea, and thought I was just busy with work, not being exploited. One of my braver cousins, Sarah, even commented publicly on my post. About time someone said it. We all knew Susie was the one keeping the lights on over there. But for every voice of support, there was a jagged edge of judgment. The older generation, the gatekeepers of our town's polite society, accused me of airing family laundry. They didn't care about the truth. They cared that I had broken the code of silence. They framed my survival as a betrayal of family unity. My parents, unable to reach me because I had blocked their numbers, were apoplectic. Since they couldn't scream at me directly, they screamed at everyone else. Ryan posted a spiteful status update about traitors who stabbed their parents in the back for attention, playing the victim with practiced ease. Word got back to me through Maya that Dad was calling mutual relatives, telling them I was mentally unstable and having a breakdown, trying to discredit my story before it could take root. He was trying to prune me from the family tree to save the reputation of the branch he actually cared about. The digital war was exhausting, but I felt safe in my apartment, miles away from their physical reach. Or so I thought. 2 days later, just as I was heating up leftovers after a long shift, my intercom buzzed. The sound made me jump. I pressed the button. Yes. Ms. Cole. The doorman's voice crackled. Your parents are here. They say it's a family emergency. My stomach turned to ice. They had driven 3 hours. This wasn't just drama anymore. This was an invasion. Don't let them up, I said, my voice shaking. Tell them to leave. I hung up, heart pounding against my ribs. A second later, my phone lit up with a text. It was from a number I didn't recognize, likely Ryan's burner or a friend's phone. We're downstairs. Open the door. Now. I stared at the screen. I could hide. I could call the police. I could wait them out. But a sudden cold clarity washed over me. If I hid now, I would be hiding forever. If this was the moment my family finally tried to break me, I wasn't going to do it cowering in my kitchen. I grabbed my keys, took a deep breath that tasted like fear and steel, and walked out the door. When the elevator doors slid open in the lobby, the scene was almost cinematic. Dad was standing near the front desk, rigid and imposing, his eyes cold enough to freeze water. Mom was next to him, looking frazzled, her coat buttoned wrong, her eyes shiny with tears torn between her guilt and her unwavering loyalty to him. And leaning against the marble wall was Ryan, looking bored, checking his fingernails, radiating the smug confidence of someone who has never had to clean up his own mess. Dad saw me first. He didn't wait for a greeting. He marched across the lobby, his finger pointed at my face. You have humiliated us. He hissed, his voice low, but carrying through the quiet space. You put that garbage online. You threatened this family's reputation. Do you have any idea what you've done to Ryan's future? I stood my ground, refusing to step back. I told the truth. I said, my voice steady. You cut me out of the will. You tried to use guilt to extort money from me. You tried to erase me as your daughter while keeping me as your ATM. Those are facts, Dad. After everything we did for you. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. We put food in your mouth. We put clothes on your back. You owe us. I don't owe you for raising me. I snapped loud enough that the doorman looked up. That's what parents do, but you don't get to exploit me forever just because you fed me as a child. You will regret turning your back on your own parents, he spat. Ryan is the one who matters here. He will carry on this family name. You'll just get married and change your name and disappear. That assets belong to the Cole name. The words hung in the air, brutal and final. He had finally said the quiet part out loud. He didn't just favor Ryan. He viewed me as temporary, a placeholder until I belonged to some other man. I wasn't a person to him. I was a liability. I looked at him, then at Mom, who wouldn't meet my eyes, and finally at Ryan. I stepped toward my brother. You want the house, Ryan? I asked. You want the legacy? You want the big Cole name? Then you pay the mortgage. You pay the property taxes. You buy the groceries. You take care of them. I'm done. Ryan sneered, pushing off the wall. You're crazy, Suze. I turned back to Dad. I am not your retirement plan anymore. Dad's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen. If you walk away now, we will cut you out completely. Don't you dare come crawling back when you need us. You will have nothing. I looked him dead in the eye. You already tried to cut me out, Dad. You did it the moment you signed that will. I'm just making it official now. I turned on my heel and walked back toward the elevators. My legs felt like jelly, but I didn't stumble. I pressed the button and the doors opened immediately. As I stepped inside and turned around, I saw Dad lunging forward, restrained only by Mom's hand on his arm. You're no daughter of mine, he shouted across the lobby, his voice cracking with rage. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing me inside. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. In that moment, as the car began to rise, I realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. My father had already disowned me years ago. I was just finally agreeing with him. The lobby showdown didn't end with a bang, but with the squeal of tires. The doorman told me later that they argued all the way to the car, Ryan throwing his hands up in the air, Dad red-faced and screaming. They drove away, leaving a silence in their wake that felt heavy, but for the first time it didn't feel like it was crushing me. In the weeks that followed, they tried to keep up the offensive online, posting vague statuses about loyalty and snakes in the grass. But the audience had changed. The town had seen my receipts. They had seen the numbers. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years publicly commented on one of Dad's posts, pointing out that it was rich to preach about loyalty when they had written the only contributing family member out of the will. That comment was deleted within minutes, but the damage was done. Public opinion, that fickle beast they valued so much, had turned its back on them. Without my financial buffer, reality arrived at the Cole household with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The natural consequences I had shielded them from for a decade began to pile up. I heard through Maya that the late mortgage notices were no longer being intercepted. Ryan, faced with the actual demand of contributing, crumbled immediately. He quit his consulting gig after 2 weeks because the boss was too demanding. The grapevine brought me snippets of their decline like news from a foreign country. Dad sold his beloved SUV for a cheaper sedan. Mom had to cancel their annual trip to Florida. I didn't feel a thrill of victory when I heard these things. I didn't laugh. I just nodded, acknowledging the physics of the situation. For the first time, the people who tried to erase me were finally feeling the weight of their own choices instead of dumping it on my shoulders. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family estrangement. I sat in a beige office and unspooled 30 years of conditioning, learning that no was a complete sentence. I leaned into the people who actually showed up for me, friends like Maya, co-workers who brought me coffee and said, "Good for you, that took guts." I realized that I had grown up thinking freedom meant leaving town, driving away, until the skyline disappeared in the rearview mirror. But it turned out that real freedom wasn't about geography. Freedom was standing still, looking the people who taught me to disappear in the eye and refusing to fade away. I decided to reclaim the narrative one last time. I didn't delete my original post. It stood as a record of my truth. But I wrote a follow-up, calm and measured. I thanked the people who had supported me, and I clarified my stance. Setting boundaries is not an act of aggression, I wrote. It is an act of self-respect. I hope my parents find peace, but they will have to find it without my wallet. I hit post and felt a sense of finality. I wasn't asking for their understanding anymore. I was declaring my independence. 3 months later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting was Mom's looping, frantic cursive. I debated throwing it out, but curiosity won. It was a short note woven with the same old threads of guilt. She apologized, sort of saying Dad was under a lot of pressure and that they missed having the family whole. But the subtext was screaming from the page. They missed the stability I provided. They missed the ease of life when I was footing the bill. A year ago, that letter would have broken me. I would have called them crying, checkbook in hand. Now I felt a distant pang of sorrow for the woman she was trapped under Dad's thumb, but my resolve was iron. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I could feel compassion for them without sacrificing myself again. One crisp evening, I went for a jog through a neighborhood near my apartment. The houses were nice, modest, warm, with yellow lights spilling from the windows. I slowed to a walk, catching my breath, and let my mind drift back to the big colonial house in my hometown, the estate Dad was so obsessed with protecting, the legacy Ryan was supposed to inherit. I realized that house was never a home. It was just a building where I used to live in someone else's shadow. The prize they had dangled in front of me, their approval, their inheritance, was worthless. The real revenge wasn't seeing them lose everything. The real revenge was living a life where their approval no longer had the power to threaten me. My dad always praised my brother and put me down. He thought he could erase me from his will, from his house, from his version of family. He thought that by cutting me out, he would leave me with nothing. But here's the truth. The only thing he erased was his right to call himself my father. I looked up at the sky, vast and open above the city lights, and smiled. I had sacrificed enough. From now on, I don't live to prove I belong to anyone. I live because I finally completely belong to myself. And just like that, Susan stepped out of her family's shadow and into a life that was finally her own. Sometimes the ultimate victory isn't winning the argument, but realizing you don't need to have it anymore. What would you have done in her position? Hit that subscribe button and let us know below. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.